And I would go, dude, you got a room for laundry? I couldn't really compute that. I'm a kid that carried his clothes in a hamper to the laundromat with a roll of quarters. That was my life. Like, you hear this phrase a lot in our industry, especially. A lot of coaches and mentors talk about, what's your why? My why. We're having a lot of conversations in our brokerage, and we're asking that question a lot, like, what's your why? I think it's important that you need to know, if you're self-employed, self-motivated, like, what's driving you. I know for me, early on, getting into real estate, my why was I wanted to work with my wife, and I wanted to coach baseball. I wanted to help kids. Over the years of doing real estate for a long period of time now, I think my why has changed a little bit. I still love working for my wife. I still love working with kids, but I'm starting to self-reflect a little bit. I'm getting older. My kids are getting older, but I find myself with a lot more energy, a lot more passion. I've got this new sense of just kind of hunger for real estate. And I think it's not just the new brokerage with Water's Edge. It's not being in a management role or a teaching role. Those are all great. But I think I'm realizing it's probably got a little bit to do with my childhood. So I was born in 1979 in a little town called Marshall, Texas. And throughout the years, my parents jumped around from house to house. We eventually landed in Chickasaw, Alabama. I would say that we were lower middle class for sure. I knew we were renting. It felt it. I don't know why, but there was a lot of things that were happening when I was a kid that just made me realize that we weren't homeowners, that we were renters. My parents, they fought a lot. There was a lot of, back and forth, tons of arguments when I was a kid with my parents. And I would hear things when they were arguing about rent, being evicted, the rent's late, who's gonna pay the rent. So I just felt it when I was a kid that this wasn't our house. We were just staying there. When I was 9, my parents divorced. And when they split, not to get into all of my personal life, but when my parents split, I went to live with my dad. And at that point, I felt we were lower middle class. That's when I felt like we were, basically white trash. And I'm laughing because I take ownership in that. Like, I'm proud of how I was raised. I'm not a woe is me kid. I don't blame my parents for anything. They're doing the best they can. It just didn't work out. So I went to live with my dad, and that renting lifestyle, it stayed with me for many, many years. We bounced around from government style apartments to small stints of homelessness, living with friends. We eventually found a place in Saraland at Country Haven Apartments, 1-bedroom apartment. It was good memories, but it was challenging, of course. It was a 1-bedroom apartment. My dad smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So you can imagine the challenges, just the lack of cleanliness, people around me all the time, upstairs, downstairs. You could hear people through walls. But it was okay, but that was my life, was a kid in an apartment complex for a long, long time. And again, I don't have any problem with it. I actually am proud of it, especially today, self-reflecting and all of that. I think I was 13 or 14 and my dad got a 2-bedroom apartment. Same apartment complex, right there in Saraland. And I remember like it was yesterday. I felt like we won the lottery. Just having my own space, my own room, my own privacy. I remember just that one extra bedroom for me created all this confidence. I was a pretty social kid. I had great friends. I consider myself kind of popular in high school. But I remember living in an apartment for so many years, going to my friend's house And I stayed with my friends a lot. I'd go over there and I would see things that really I thought was amazing. I wasn't really necessarily marveled by my buddies' homes. They lived in great neighborhoods like Bond's Palisades, you had Spanish Trace and Saraland. But I would see things like a laundry room. And I would go, dude, you got a room for laundry? I couldn't really compute that. You know, I'm a kid that carried his clothes in a hamper to the laundromat with a roll of quarters. That was my life. And to see things like a half bathroom, I'm like, what's a half bathroom? It makes no sense to me. Or like having a driveway and a garage. You know, my life was looking for a parking spot to park every night when I got home from work. You know, so those little things in homes and houses always mesmerized me as a kid. Fast forward, you know, I was about 25 at this point in my life, and me and my wife were able to buy our first home. And for 25 years, I had lived in an apartment or government housing or with friends or in a college dorm playing baseball. To be able to buy a home, and I'm not bragging, it was $100 and something thousand. I don't even remember, but it was a new construction home. And I just remember that first night looking at it, and to me, it was the Coliseum. It was a little 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, but I remember being overwhelmed with having not just my own home for the first time in 25 years, but it being a new construction home, that smell. I remember not even wanting to scratch it. Me and my wife sat on the living room floor, had pizza and beer. I was afraid to put furniture in it. And that feeling, it's been with me ever since then. I'm blessed now that me and my wife have been able to buy and sell homes, have multiple properties. I never take that for granted. But I think my why now has changed. I still love working for my wife, of course, and having a new role in real estate is very fulfilling for me. But that gap between being a kid that couldn't even imagine having a laundry room or a dishwasher, you know, being that was my life. I had no idea that home ownership would ever exist for me. So from that point to over here where I get to help people buy houses almost every single day. It's that gap from here to the unimaginable to doing it every single day as a job. In between that is where I find my why. It's where I find my, like, this is important. Not for the money, the power, the fame. I know a lot of people say their why is, I do it for the money, I do it for the flexibility, I do it because I don't want to work for a boss. That's cool, to each his own, and they're all great reasons. But for me, it's that feeling that I thought I'd never obtain as a human, as a person, to doing it as a profession. That's really my why.